If you think inheritance brings families closer, you've never seen what happens when greed walks into the room. Last year, my 3 children sat in front of me and argued about my money while I was still alive. They thought I was weak. They thought I would divide everything equally. What they didn't know was that I had already rewritten the will and hidden a second envelope. By the time my lawyer finished reading one single sentence, one of my children went pale, one got angry, and one realized I had been testing them for an entire year. Stay with me, because what happened next destroyed everything they thought they were entitled to. The day my children started arguing about my money, I was sitting right there in the room, alive, listening, and that's the day I decided they would get exactly what they deserved. When my husband Thomas died, the house felt unbearably quiet. For 42 years, we built everything together: the business, the properties, the investments, the life. And when he was gone, I wasn't just grieving a husband. I was grieving the only person who never saw me as an opportunity. At first, my children seemed supportive. Daniel called every morning. Claire sent flowers every week. Marcus visited twice in the first month. But grief sharpens your awareness. And slowly, I began to notice the pattern. Every conversation circled back to the same subject. Mom, have you updated the will? Mom, do you need help organizing Dad's financial documents? Mom, you should really think about what's fair. That word kept echoing in my mind. The shift. One afternoon, I walked into the kitchen and overheard them. They didn't know I was home. Daniel was leaning against the counter. If Mom gives the company to Marcus, that's ridiculous. I'm the oldest. Claire crossed her arms. The beach house should be mine. I practically grew up there. Marcus didn't say much, but he didn't defend me either. I stood in the hallway, invisible in my own house. That was the moment something inside me hardened. They weren't worried about losing me. They were worried about losing assets. The decision. I called our family lawyer the next morning. Prepare the documents, I told him, but not the ones they're expecting. For the next year, I watched quietly. I didn't confront them. I didn't argue. I observed. Daniel visited when business matters were involved. Claire showed up when property taxes were discussed. Marcus came occasionally, but always with a question attached. Except once. 6 months after Thomas passed, there was a knock on my door at 8:17 p.m. It was raining. Marcus stood there holding 2 paper bags of takeout. No reason, he said. I just figured you shouldn't eat alone tonight. We ate in silence. He fixed the loose cabinet hinge, watched an old movie with me, and when I brought up the will, almost as a test, he shook his head. Mom, not tonight. He left at midnight and never mentioned inheritance. I didn't say anything to anyone, but I remembered. A year later, I called them all together. They arrived dressed like executives heading into a merger. Daniel confident, Claire composed, Marcus quiet. The lawyer sat at the head of the table. The room smelled of polished wood and anticipation. He began reading. To my beloved children, I leave everything they have always wanted. Relief flooded their faces instantly. Claire even smiled at Daniel. But the lawyer continued, on one condition. Daniel leaned forward. What condition? The lawyer adjusted his glasses. My entire estate will go to the child who spent the most time caring for me during the year following my husband's passing, without discussing inheritance or financial gain. Not confusion, recognition. They knew. Daniel's jaw tightened. Claire looked down at her hands. Marcus stared at me. The fallout. That's subjective, Daniel snapped. Claire's voice trembled. Mom, we were grieving too. I nodded slowly. I know. The lawyer continued. My entire estate will be transferred to the Thomas and Eleanor Foundation, established to fund community housing and scholarships. Claire gasped. Daniel stood abruptly. You're giving strangers our inheritance? I finally spoke. Strangers didn't treat me like an investment. The room froze. The second envelope. As tension filled the air, my lawyer cleared his throat. There is one more document. Daniel laughed bitterly. Of course there is. The lawyer opened a smaller envelope. In the event that any one child visited me without prompting, without financial discussion, and without expectation, that visit shall be considered fulfillment of the condition. Daniel turned slowly toward Marcus. Claire's eyes widened. Marcus looked stunned, because he remembered. The rainy Tuesday, the takeout, the silence, the hinge he fixed without being asked, the revelation. The lawyer continued. That child will inherit full control of the estate. The room exploded. That's manipulation, Daniel shouted. Claire's voice cracked. Mom, this isn't fair. Marcus stood up. I didn't do that for money, he said quietly. I know, I replied. That's why you're the only one who qualifies. But I wasn't finished. The lawyer read the last paragraph. The inheriting child must divide the estate equally among siblings, but only if they attend 12 monthly family dinners over the next year, without discussing finances. Failure to rebuild this family will result in 100% transfer to the foundation. This time no one spoke. The money was no longer the prize. The condition was. Marcus looked at his siblings. Daniel looked conflicted. Claire looked ashamed. For the first time, they weren't calculating assets. They were calculating effort. I stood up slowly. You were so focused on what you'd gain when I died that you forgot I was still here. Daniel's anger softened. Claire wiped her tears. Marcus looked overwhelmed by a responsibility he never asked for. I'm not punishing you, I continued. I'm giving you a choice. Money or family. Control or connection. Legacy or love. 1 year later. The first dinner was awkward. No one knew what to say. The second was tense. By the fourth, Daniel brought wine. By the sixth, Claire brought old photo albums. By the ninth, they were laughing. Not transactional smiles. On the 12th dinner, Daniel raised a glass. To Dad, he said, and to Mom for not giving up on us. I didn't tell them that I had already prepared the foundation papers as backup. I didn't tell them how close they came to losing everything, because sometimes the threat of loss is enough. Closing line, cinematic ending. In the end, they didn't inherit my fortune. They inherited something far more valuable. The understanding that wealth isn't what you leave behind. It's who shows up while you're still here. And that was the only sentence that ever really mattered.